Cuphead, the delicious last course, which is the DLC to Cuphead, is a masterpiece between skill and difficulty. The delicious last course is about Cuphead, Mugman, and Chalice finding all of the ingredients that the bosses in the game have, and getting Mr. Saltbaker, who is a villain by the way, to make them a cookie so Chalice can come back to life. Today, I'm gonna beat this by spinning the wheel of challenges before every boss and completing the challenge that comes with it. Why am I doing this? If you guys have seen the last video I made, it was a mod video, and I want to prove to you guys that I'm a good Cuphead player who doesn't just need mods. Starting the game off, my first challenge was to beat the Moonshine mob without dashing. I thought this would be an easy challenge, but I was proven wrong almost immediately. Not only was the dash button wired into my brain, but I also realized that the dash would actually be useful for dodging most of these attacks. Even though it was the first boss, I had a lot of trouble, and it took much longer than I should have taken. Phase 1 was fighting the spider and his goons, in which I did just that. Eventually, I adapted to the boss's pattern and learned to get past this pretty easily and simply.
That's too easy!
In Phase 2, the dancing bug comes down, and you have to dodge the red lasers and the dancing barrels or police bees. This phase was pretty simple, and I moved on to the hardest phase, which was the Anteater. The Anteater uses his mouth to shoot projectiles and also to stab you with his tongue. Even in the run where I won, this was still a very hard phase. Then we moved on to the final phase of the battle. This phase is an easy and short phase where you shoot the snail on top. Eventually I won this phase and beat my first challenge. The second boss I had to defeat was Esther Winchester. The challenge I got for this boss was to beat it without jumping. This was really easy because you can't jump at plain levels. However, this led me to have a false sense of victory when I came to this boss, and it showed. The boss turned out to be an absolute menace even without a hard challenge from the wheel. Phase 1 involved dodging the cow's eels that come out of her gun, which doesn't really make any sense. Dodging dynamite, birds with those spike balls, and a huge cactus. After learning Phase 1, we moved on to Phase 2, in which the cow pulls out a vacuum and starts vacuuming money. After taking down Phase 2, I moved on to the third phase, where she turns into a sausage cow and shoots steak out of her mouth. I'm not gonna lie, this boss fight is kinda weird. After dodging all of the steak and sausages, we moved on to the final phase, which was the hardest for me. In this phase, you have to dodge chilies, which doesn't sound hard, but the hardest part is to keep dodging the sausages and avoid the chilies at the same time. Eventually, I locked in hard enough to put an end to this boss, which was unbelievably satisfying. After beating the cow, we move on to the dogs and fight on a plane. The challenge I had for this boss was to not parry. This was a pretty simple challenge which made some parts harder, but luckily did not completely ruin my run for me. This boss was definitely a wild fight, but I managed to will my way through this fight. Phase 1 involved dodging the big dog's bones, Tom and Jerry, the little dog's tennis balls, and the flying fire hydrants. After taking down the first phase, we moved on to the second phase, which was the flying dogs. Using the spread shot, I aimed up and took out the dogs one by one, and we moved on to the last phase. The last phase was against the captain of the dog ship, who has lasers, can invert the screen, and has very sharp dog balls. Eventually, I adapted to the screen turning and the pesky lasers and beat the boss. The fourth boss in the challenge to defeat was Mortimer Freeze. I spun the wheel and got a jackpot, which was the extra health mod. Using this mod I got 6 HP, which helped out a lot with my playthrough with this boss. Using the bonus health I had, I beat up the boss with pretty low difficulty, which is expected when you bend the game to your will. Phase 1 included Mortimer throwing down ice minions and dodging his cards and his well back. Making it to Phase 2, we fought the Ice Golem from Clash Royale, which was definitely a challenge. This Ice Golem can use swords, ice cubes, and can roll insanely fast. Beating up the Ice Golem, we moved on to the final phase, which was Phase 3, in which Mortimer turns into a snowflake. In this phase, we have to dodge the projectiles that come from his spirit, the flying gems that fly around and make our way around the mini ice Ferris wheel. After eventually shooting him enough, I won the boss fight and moved on to the final boss before the big finale of the game. Upon reaching the 5th boss in the game, we got the challenge of switching to Chalice. This was a nice challenge to get from the wheel, but I assure you that the final boss equaled out the pain that the wheel had me trying to avoid. In this boss fight, Glumstone the Giant uses a ton of gimmicks to try to beat you with his giant powers. In Phase 1, you stand on up to 5 pillars that raise you up and down. Glumstone will shoot projectiles out of his mouth, send geese towards you, and throw a bear at you. Not to mention that the gnomes also try to screw you over by hitting the platform you're on, or by sending projectiles at you. The second phase, you're put on a snow mountain in which the devil and the king dice, which looks more like a jester actually, throw a ball at you while gnomes come at you from the bottom of the mountain. Eventually, after whittling down the health of this phase, I managed to win it and move on to phase 3. The final phase, you get swallowed by Glumstone the giant and you have to fight against his throat. After parrying a bunch, we eventually won. After defeating all of the bosses in the map, we went to Saltbaker's kitchen, only to see that he was actually doing devious acts in his kitchen. This moves us on to the final boss of the game. For this boss, I got the challenge of using only the spread shot, which sounded good. However, this boss actually took me the longest time out of all of them, which was 4 hours and maybe even over. In this fight, Chef Saltbaker literally cooks up recipes, turns into a salt man, which is a salt version of snowman, and turns into a heart. In phase 1, he started out by chopping up ingredients and sending them at me, while also having a really annoying fireball jumping at me from the ceiling. Most of the ingredients were fine, but the fireball and the limes were absolute nightmares and caused most of my deaths or retries. Making it to phase 2, Saltbaker becomes a giant and holds you in his palm while you destroy salt to damage him. In this phase, you have to dodge the fireball again, just to make us players miserable. You have to dodge leaves that fall from the sky and the projectiles that the salt shoot. After making it to phase 3, Saltbaker turns into some weird Salt Man dancer and jumps around the stage. This phase isn't too hard, but the issue was that the fact that his legs can stick out and hit you from pretty far away. After beating this, we are put into the final phase of the boss fight, which is phase 4. In this phase, Saltbaker transforms into a heart and you have to jump on the salt platforms and kill his heart. This phase isn't too hard, but the issue was that you had to stay composed as it was your final phase of a really long boss fight, and one wrong mistake can mean falling to your death or hitting the heart by accident. After tons of tries, I finally locked in and won the boss, which allowed me to complete the game and the video. Thanks to the people who supported my last video, as I made this video just for you. I am making a Plants vs Zombies Nuzlocke 3 days from now, and I hope you all enjoy that. Thanks for watching everyone, and the outro will play in 3, 2,